So for those of you who don't know, Comcast is an investor in multiple gaming projects, some of the biggest being Fanduel, which we hope to talk about a little. And prior to joining Comcast Ventures, Gavin worked at a product management at a small company called Zynga, where he was responsible for building growth features in another small product, Farmville, and then later developing Zynga's international business. Before Zynga, Gavin worked at Microsoft's Xbox team and for Bain & Company. Along with Gavin, we have Balaji Gopinath, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who's Vice President of Emerging Technologies at Turner Broadcasting, a Time Warner company. He's also the founder, managing director of Media Camp, the first media-focused accelerator in the startup space, which obviously is one of the topics of this panel. And over the last probably 20 years or so, Balaji has worked with leading tech companies, media and entertainment companies, spearheading digital initiatives and global roles, everything from a GM to SVP and VP role at both private and public companies, companies ranging from NCR to Nike. He was also instrumental in helping launch Hotwire.com and Sephora, among other .com superstars. So we're going to kind of jump into the panel now, but before that we wanted to get a better idea of who's here in the audience today. So if we can just get a show of hands of how many people have already published at least one game? 2 or more games? How many of you have taken outside investment, institutional investment, or from a strategic? Great. And how many of you have worked with a third-party publisher to bring your game to market? Okay, great. So we have a nice mix of people, and I think varying levels of experience there. So maybe kind of jump into the questions now, and start by asking Gavin and then Balaji, and it's going to be a little different, but yeah, how are you both working with accelerators? How do they fit into your investment model and what you're looking to do in terms of growing your parts of your business?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. As I think back on my first interaction with Casual Connect, it was in Seattle in 2009. It's the third year you guys put the event on. And I was with Xbox at the time. Just a fantastic experience. And to see it grow into a much bigger event today is a privilege to be able to see and be a part of. And thank you, Lloyd, for putting together the questions in this panel. To answer the question, maybe I can start by giving a little bit of an overview on what I do at Comcast Ventures. So we are a venture capital fund that invests on behalf of Comcast and NBC Universal. So a big cable company and a big set of media brands. And we think about investing in 2 ways. One, we want to back the best teams like yourselves, that can create great product and that can generate exits, that can generate cash-on-cash returns for us and our source of capital. And we want to do so secondarily in a way that helps to drive two-way value between the assets we have and the companies that we back. So that could be a transmedia deal, that could be a distribution deal, it could be a co-marketing deal. And there are examples of that in our current gaming portfolio. In addition to Fanduel, we're also investors in Tryon Worlds and also Addiction. So I would say that how we work with accelerators fits into the way that we screen deals and look for great investments to back. And that is, because we come from the vantage point of big media and cable distribution, the companies that attract us the most are the ones that can leverage the assets behind some of our brands. They tend to be a little bit further on, so some of the folks in the room have worked with our licensing groups down in LA. Others here have published multiple games, and I would say that tends to be our focus, which is, call it sort of Series A and up companies that have products in the space and are looking for capital to grow and expand, and partnerships alongside of that to also reach the same set of goals. Accelerators, and Balaji will share a lot on his experience there, I think play a very important part in that ecosystem and helping to take companies that are pretty small and grow them to a place where they can work with big media brands like Comcast, like Turner, and others in this space. So I would say that we have on our radar screen a short list of accelerators that we stay in close contact with, and I think that's a very important part of the ecosystem as we want to get a pipeline of great talent, great teams, and great products to back as they mature and get larger over time.
Balaji, would you like to comment more and also
Sure.
maybe talk a little bit about Media Camp?
So to echo Gavin's thank you for having me as well participate. These guys are great, so hopefully I'll learn some things from them as well, and hopefully add some value for you guys. To elaborate on my role, emerging technologies is a broad remit. We have 3 things that we do as a group. We have inside-out innovation effort, which is kind of an applied research lab out of Atlanta. We build products and services ourselves, a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the technology that gets deployed across the Turner universe both domestically and internationally, as well as it gets taken advantage of through our sister companies many times at Warner Brothers and HBO when appropriate. Our team also serves a bit of a core biz dev function with the bellwether companies in the Bay Area and others that kind of influence the space that we all kind of live in this evolving world of media. We try to figure out what's going on in the product roadmaps and technology roadmaps. How do we take advantage of that, and how can we collaborate effectively to influence some of that and become the first to market in some of those areas? And then the third is the accelerator that we launched 3 years ago. It was really arguably the first media-focused accelerator, and we kind of position ourselves as a grad school of accelerators in terms of how we work with other accelerators. We know the guys at 500 and Techstars and YCOM fairly well. We get a lot of graduates from other accelerators that come into ours, including Matter, and they look at us to kind of help them figure out their product market fit and how do we help accelerate their understanding of the domain called media, and then help them figure out what's the right product and service to bring to market, how do you price it, who truly are your constituents, and how do we help them get chartered deals, either within the Turner universe, the Time Warner universe, or elsewhere in partnership with Comcast and others, and trying to direct them the right way. We also feed into Time Warner Investments, which is really our corporate venture arm in many ways, and we help source a lot of deals for them. They're chartered very much like Gavin is as Comcast, with true financial returns on the investment. Also work closely with the investment teams at Warner Brothers, HBO, and Turner, who have much more of a strategic focus. We tend to play earlier on the space. We look for companies that not just have ideas, but actually have a product shipping. And when we say product, it can be the game, it could be an app, or it could be the infrastructure and technology that kind of helps power a lot of the stuff through analytics, data, marketing, social engagement. There's a whole gamut of things that kind of encompass the space today. We kind of play in that space.
I mean, you both mentioned brands and how it's built into your strategy and your investment strategy. It's obviously the topic of the conversation. Kind of on the counter side, actually at my first company, we actually ran into a lot of problems with institutional investors because they didn't want to invest in companies that relied on brands, because then if they created the next Candy Crush, it would be contingent on the brand. How do you see kind of the trade-offs between creating your own IP versus working with maybe not third-party content, second party if it's a portfolio company, but in terms of the growth opportunities for a company, and how should a company kind of balance that trade-off?
Yeah, maybe I can take a first crack at that. So I would say that traditional institutional investment has multiple goals, right? And I think early on in an industry's life cycle, there's always a bias towards investing behind platforms, behind companies that can develop hits on an independent basis that doesn't have to rely on, say, third-party marketing and support, as Lloyd put it, where a brand partnership could be construed as one example of that. And I think as an industry matures and some of those early, fair or unfair advantages in distribution start to get commoditized away, then growth can come from many different areas. One of which is doing a partnership with Fast and Furious 6 or Despicable Me or Kim Kardashian, all of which help with growth and distribution and marketing. So I would say there isn't sort of one way to do it. There are lots of ways to be successful at it, and the way we look at it is there isn't really a strong bias one way or the other. I think where there is a preference, it would be maybe one of our brands that we can help structure a commercial deal around that can also help a company grow, but should we also back an independent developer that wants to go it alone and build a portfolio of titles beyond that? I think that's wholly appropriate too, and there's been great examples of companies building a lot of value using that path. So I would say, to wrap up, you have to be flexible about it, and I think you have to look at every deal on its own merits. And with I would say limited dev cycles and opportunity cost of allocating your resources in different ways, it's up to the management team to pick. Do you want to do something that's a little bit more independent, or do you want to work with a third party? But good examples of success doing both.
So we're probably the opposite of that. We truly believe content is king, and the brands are really what help drive some of this thing. We take a perspective. If we bring a huge market to your doorstep and you have a fantastic team, together we can create a great game or app that can take the market by storm, and we can help you with the distribution in the sheer fact that we control a lot of the ad spend, and we have access to driving a lot of distribution and downloads. So we tend to look at things as license, as our friends at Warner Brothers do quite often, is license their brand out. We look at our partnership structures, particularly outside the U.S., in terms of If you want to really license our brand on a rev share basis, we're open to doing that internationally fairly consistently. In the U.S., we're a little more controlled about how we look at that and what we do around that. But bottom line is that we think brand is very important. We think we have compelling stories to tell from a content perspective that becomes additive to the distribution and the revenue you can create through gaming.
Thanks. Balaji, in your first response, you listed some of the kind of rock stars among accelerators and how you partner with them. And there's so many accelerators and incubators out there now. How do you, both of you as an investor, look at them and see if their portfolio companies are adding value or not, and how would you recommend to folks out here in terms of deciding which incubator or accelerator to go with? I'm sure that there's is there huge variance? Are they all pretty much the same, or are there different skills and resources you get from them?
I think they all vary. I think Techstars has done a great job at the general technology entrepreneurship path and teaching people how to build companies, how to look at technology, and make some warm introductions to investors. I think 500 has done something very similar, and have cast a wide net. YCOM really invest in early ideas. All three invest in early ideas where you don't necessarily have to have something shipping or close to beta. So in terms of selection, a lot of it to me is really what strategic value do you want to get out of this, and what connections are you looking for to kind of help drive it. From our perspective, and I can talk to that probably more intimately than others, is if you think you have a company that serves a media space, that's where we make sense, because we bring mentors and we bring access into the media world that's very intimate, that's very high level. Many times it takes folks anywhere from 6 to 9 months, even longer, to even get that access. And then we help to shape the product or service into a shippable product or a next generation product that's actually something people will buy or that brands will partner with. In terms of other accelerators, I think it varies. We're very high touch. Others aren't as high touch. They provide money and access and mentorship through their network of people. And there are a lot more vertical accelerators being developed. So if you're in the app space, I think you go after ones that can leverage your domain expertise. If you're more general in the gaming category, there are a few that are around I think do a very, very good job. I think the key for anybody in the digital world today is how do you get distribution? And who can help you get the distribution the fastest in terms of testing what you have and then iterating on it, and so that you can build that stickiness with your product.
I totally agree with that. The one thing I would add is, as you think about some of these horizontal accelerators out there, like Techstars, for example, they've started to verticalize around both corporate and then theme-based partnerships. So you see Techstars powering great accelerator programs like Connect with Xbox, Sprint on the connectivity side, Nike, Fuel Labs on the kind of apparel and device side of the house as well. And I think that speaks to some of these trends of verticalization, because they all add different flavors and different values to what a founding team wants to do to take a company or product from A to B. So I would say, within media, and for the topic of brand partnerships, certainly I would say Media Camp is right up there. As you think about other areas that might intersect with gaming, so there are, I think recently there's been some news around the intersection of gaming and healthcare. So the gamification of engagement mechanics to get people to do more healthy things wrapped around, some piece of content that looks like a game. And I would say there are companies like Startup Health, Blueprint Health that have some domain expertise in both consumer internet and then healthcare technology that could be interesting. On more of the hardware side, I think you're starting to see Highway 1, Bolt.io start to invite companies in their classes that do virtual reality or augmented reality type hardware. I think Connect as well is very interesting along those lines. So I would say, find something that's a little bit, unique about the accelerator, push hard on the questions as to why they're the best place for you to spend the next 6 months. And then at the end of the day, I would say that the vertical versus horizontal approach is going to become more and more interesting as companies know, what exactly they want to get out of that partnership.
How important is the accelerator in gaining access to the two of you? I'm sure you get probably hundreds of companies that want to speak to you every week. And you always hear that many deals are based on a relationship or something similar, as opposed to a cold call or an email or a LinkedIn introduction. So how important is it the accelerator kind of, in your view, to kind of get past that screening process?
In terms of access, not only me, but the rest of our team, who are pretty incredible, probably more so than me, we become extensions of any company. We truly become either your architect, if that's what you need. We become product guys. We become biz dev, corp dev. We do any function where we need to plug a hole, and we open up our entire network and Rolodex to make the company successful. We also expose the ugly side of the business, so you understand exactly where the problems are, where you'll actually hit roadblocks, where you hit a dead end, and help you to avoid some of that through our experience and knowing that they're either the wrong players, the wrong way to attack the business. So I think from that perspective, being part of Accelerator is very high touch, whether it's ours or somebody else's, adds a lot of value in the people you work with on a day-to-day basis. And I think, going back to the previous question, selecting the right accelerator is almost like hiring somebody for your own team. And if you believe that the accelerator's value is that they become extensions of your team, not only for the time you're in the accelerator, but for many years after, which is what we've seen with ours, it's important to pick the right place to go. And we truly function in that perspective. We make connections not only within Time Warner, but outside of Time Warner to anybody we know in the media industry that we think could be valuable for the company.
The only thing I would add to that is, at the end of the day, this is a relationship business, right? And if you look at venture capital is a service. And the service that it provides is access to capital and access to relationships. So, if I get a call from Balaji saying, you have to talk to this company coming out of my most recent class, you bet I'm going to take that call, I'm going to take that meeting, and I'll be very excited to hear more. So I think there is a lot of access that comes out of great programs like his. But I also think that, the best investors have, sourcing strategies that are also direct and not intermediated through, partnerships. And so at the end of the day, it's a balance of finding the best deal flow across those sources.
You both mentioned in your answers, and actually to me when we were kind of discussing the presentation, transmedia, which is a term that's been around now I first heard it probably about 5 years ago, probably around longer, but really the extension of digital products and I don't know if movies are even digital products these days, but traditional media and the brand extension across all these platforms. What's your thought on transmedia? Is it more than a fad? How is it affecting your business, both the underlying Warner Brothers, Comcast business, and then your investment strategies?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a crack at that. So I'll give you a couple examples and then maybe some learnings of things that worked well and didn't, and how that informs our investment strategy going forward. And I'll focus on gaming and consumer internet. So 2 examples within our gaming portfolio. Tryon Worlds, a big publisher behind Rift, End of Nations, Defiance. They have a transmedia deal in place with Sci-Fi, which is one of our channels. So there's a TV show that plays on Sci-Fi that mirrors the content that's pushed in the game. The game's an MMO, there's a storyline to it, and the season-long content on TV is sort of a parallel city in this sort of post-apocalyptic environment. So I would say that's a very tight integration, and I would say the pros of that are that a lot of thought goes into how you put this together. Clearly, there has to be a product and feature roadmap that supports the transmedia deal, and the goals are tied towards the economic success factors that you would imagine both a gaming company and then a media partner are looking for. So it would be reach and engagement and additional distribution from Tryon, and then from the NBC and Sci-Fi guys. I would say it's really testing out whether we can get ratings improvements and ultimately monetize our sponsored placements on air in a way that is really accretive to companies and consumer internet and technology that's not strictly commerce oriented, right? So a lot of transmedia to date has been content marketing associated with infomercials on TV, and that's just not high value to a big brand. So as you think about where can you push with these partnerships, some really interesting integrations, I think Defiance is a good example of a tight one that's going well.
How have the results been on that?
Yeah, so, to the degree I can comment on that, I would say that Defiance is still early title. It's out on Xbox. It's out it's on console and PC. It has to be successful in its own merits to really make the most out of a Sci-Fi partnership. But so far, we've been encouraged by where the numbers have come out.
Have you seen it impact the television show at all?
Yeah, that's a little harder to measure, but the show itself needs to also stand on its own merits, and I would say that so far the ratings are in line with what we expected. Yeah. And then I would say on the other side of the house, maybe a lighter integration, but one that's still very valuable to an investment we've made is with regards to Fanduel and NBC Sports. So Fanduel is in the real money gaming space. They are a daily fantasy sports platform, the leading one in the space, and it allows gamers to effectively take a position on what would traditionally be a season-long fantasy league and truncate that experience down into a day or a week. So it becomes a lot more exciting, and depending how you look at it, also a lot more like sports betting than sort of traditional fantasy, but with a very entertainment-oriented focus and not regulated by the Gaming Enforcement Act. So we led their Series C at the beginning of last year, and one of the parts of the evaluation that we were looking at as we were assessing the deal was what could we bring to bear from an NBC Sports perspective. And so NBC Sports has several commerce properties right now on their internet and digital portfolio, one of which is a golf tee time booking engine, another one of which is data services around fantasy leagues. And the idea was, could we cross-promote traffic from NBCSports.com and its subdomains to Fanduel, which is still primarily a web property, also mobile, but primarily web, and then use that transmedia partnership to help grow both properties. And I think in this situation, it's been very successful, in fact. So Fanduel, one of the core metrics of this business is first-time depositors. It's like equivalent of installs, and they're highly valuable. And the traffic drive that NBC Sports was able to do for them over the last sort of baseball, March Madness, and then football season accounted for more than half of the traffic that they got from partnerships. So that's an example of, I think, a tight transmedia integration that was quite successful.
So I've always hated the word transmedia, but I can't figure out a new word to describe it, so I'll use it. I think early instances of transmedia were pretty awkward in their execution, and the one that always comes to mind that worked well was Heroes on NBC, right? That's one that everybody kind of points to as the big success in transmedia from the old world. I think as platforms have proliferated and there are more ways to access and interact with content, this becomes a real space for distributors and MSOs like Comcast, as well as content publishers and creators like ourselves. The challenge has been, how do you start to do transmedia upstream in the production cycle so that's truly integrated into the storyline in some way, and to Gavin's point, it kind of stands on its own as a value proposition and offering to the consumer, versus being so tightly coupled that you can't do one without the other, because it's hard to figure out a monetization model that allows that to work effectively. That being said, we are looking at ways in which we take existing IP and it can extend that value. One of our investments, and one of the companies that went through Media Camp last year, a company called Plumsy, in the animation space, actually takes data from episodes that did really well from a Nielsen ratings perspective, takes those episodes, uses their proprietary kind of production tools and process to create a game that makes that entire episode interactive, and then relaunches that to the market. They did this with Nickelodeon. They've done it with us. They're doing it with Warner Brothers, and they are multiple contracts in place where they're looking at the existing catalog, looking at existing IP, and creating new ways of bringing the same content to market with much more of a gaming approach to it that appeals to millennial audiences and appeals to the younger generation. And they're making quite a bit of money doing this in a rev share basis. There's another company going through Media Camp in LA right now, X-Team from Doctor Who. We're saying, you know what, all these interesting stories are out there from an IP perspective. What if we were to take that story and create new IP and extend that storyline in different ways and reimagine where things could go? Again, a very different perspective on transmedia. We think that has a lot of legs and a lot of potential. So from a transmedia perspective, there are two different ways. I think from a content publisher standpoint, we've traditionally always looked at games as extensions, as ancillary revenue streams, and as game publishers, particularly on platforms like Xbox, you look at video as an extension to your core product, which is the game, say, hey, we can drive some of that stuff back to us. In this new world, the two are very, very tightly coupled. And you finally start seeing different people getting in the same room to try to figure out what are the different hooks. How do you unlock content by playing games? How do you pull an advertiser into the mix and make their presence and their ad buy on TV more valuable throughout the entire experience around that licensed property or brand? So again, all very early for us, but I think the platform proliferation allows us to take more interesting approaches around that whole transmedia concept.
You mentioned how you hated the word originally transmedia, and I think my feeling, especially in the Bay Area, is you get a lot of these buzzwords, people throw them together in a PowerPoint, and that all of a sudden becomes the company rather than starting with the great idea. So what I wanted to do is maybe throw out a few buzzwords I've been hearing a lot lately and see if you thought they were real and if they were going to be honestly the next big thing, or if they were something that, they're in PowerPoints today, you won't be talking about them next year. Because a lot of these buzzwords do turn out to be, great successes. A few years ago, everyone was talking about social casino as the next big thing. Looking around this content, this show, it largely is. So, let's start with you, Balaji. I'll just throw out the word and tell me if you think it's real or not. Machine learning.
I think machine learning is very real. We look at it quite a bit. I mean, big data is the big buzzword now, but how do you look at it to kind of form your approaches to many different things? And machine learning is in the middle of that in terms of what we learn from a behavioral standpoint, usage standpoint, monetization, revenue standpoint. Now, how do all these things kind of come into play and start to profile the consumer in very different ways? How somebody interacts on Facebook versus Twitter versus an app are very, very different. The machine learning allows us to construct different business models, even different pricing models potentially, in terms of how do we attack some of this stuff without a lot of manpower, without a lot of recreation of the same assets. And I think it's a very real thing, not only for our space, but for many different spaces: healthcare, enterprise software, SaaS models, the whole gamut.
Yeah, I would say that gaming and ad tech, particularly ad tech for gaming, are two verticals where machine learning is more sophisticated than you see across most of the technology ecosystem. So preaching to the choir in many ways about the relevance and importance of the theme of using learning and algorithm to drive sort of programmatic changes to content and experiences. Maybe one thing I'll throw out is an area that I've started to look at is the intersection of machine learning and the connected home. And by that I mean, there's a trend right now, Internet of Things, if you will, another buzzword may have been on your list, but what is that intersection of that and entertainment? So as you enter your home, sure, there's Nest for your energy management, and there's Dropcam for your security camera, but what about Sonos for what music plays, or an audio visual entertainment driven machine learning product that can put something on the TV that's relevant to the individual, a game perhaps. So I think that's an area where there's going to be expansion of investment and research, development, and cool products that come out.
Next one, sort of real or not, wearables.
So there's my team believes wearables are very real. Our team was the first to develop the first video app on Google Glass with CNN, and we have extended that in many different ways internally. A lot of things we can't bring to the public, including facial recognition that we built into Google Glass and things that we kind of hacked around to allow that to happen. We play with a lot of different devices. We're the first one to develop an app for Samsung Gear. We're working on some stuff with the Android products today and next generation Samsung products. We think, again, how all this plays into the entire concept of interacting with the consumer are very real, and these devices allow you to have utilitarian hooks into day-to-day interaction around your content that other devices don't necessarily have today. And the promise of that is huge. The monetization models are really suspect still, but as the two kind of evolve and kind of come together and the platforms in general become a little more stable, we think that's going to be a big space that will evolve and the price points actually come down. And if you look at some of the other stuff that's going on, in terms of Facebook's acquisition of some of their AR technology and other things, it becomes pretty compelling.
So I would say wearables, yes, particularly for consumer fitness. And a little bit biased because we're investors in Jawbone that makes the Up bracelet. I think wearables for core gaming experiences 3 to 5 years out. I think wearables for casual experiences, I'm not so sure.
And the last one, and this one I hope you say yes to because it's one I'm excited about, is messaging and maybe the integration of messaging and games and opportunities there.
Sure, I think messaging again is very utilitarian. It's self-selecting. It becomes pervasive in many ways, and it gives you a different form of interaction, both from a machine learning and algorithmic standpoint in terms of just being able to message people in different ways and start those discussions, as well as tie a community together in very interesting ways and bring some of the game mechanics into play in terms of how people actually interact and talk to each other, as well as get information in general. So I think it's very real.
Yeah, I would say, there's a great panel here on sort of the use of messaging platforms to distribute games, right? And I would say if you take a look back 3 to 4 years, what made companies like Zynga very successful early on was having an unfair advantage in distribution, which was Facebook Web at the time, and now is obviously different, with mobile. And I would say, messaging platforms are just huge reach drivers if they think about gaming distribution thoughtfully. Many of them are, and I think I'm bullish on what more they will do with regards to in-app purchase and monetization, supporting a gaming ecosystem. I think that it sort of behooves all of you guys in the room to speak to both the largest and then the most aggressive ones. And I think you're starting to see messaging platforms verticalize around geographic location. And then you're also seeing horizontal global platforms as well that are very large. The degree to which gaming distribution becomes part of their core strategy, I mean, you have to ask all of them. But I think I would strongly encourage you guys to think about that.
Thanks. Gavin, you suggested a topic, and it's really interesting to me. You implied that in-app purchase model is, I wouldn't say going away, but there's other monetization models that are developing, and in-app purchases are becoming maybe more hit-driven. I'd love if both of you could talk about how you see the monetization environment evolving, what other monetization models are out there that are really gaining traction.
Sure, maybe I'll start. So I would say, it's going to always be IAP for core product, right? At the end of the day, you got to have experiences that can encourage consumers to open up their wallets for user pay purposes. I mean, that's a very good bellwether of whether the product is sticky, retains and engages well, and that the core unit economics of the experience are positive. I think advertising, though, is less supplemental now than it used to be, and in some cases, depending on the IP and depending on how a deal might be structured, and depending on the content, it could be a primary source of revenue. So I think you guys know that as well as I do, so I won't speak to kind of examples of that, but maybe I'll comment on one other sort of social phenomenon around gaming that really is advertising driven, and that is Twitch TV, right? So if you had asked me 4 years ago whether I would imagine that 50 million people would go onto a site and watch other people play games, I would have said very unlikely. But if you look at where they have grown to today, it's not just core content. They're live streaming off of Xbox, PlayStation, PC for a long time, but it's also mobile titles now. They have a mobile SDK that allows you to live stream, a Gameloft racing game, right? So I would say, where does that content go, and how is that then monetized, since it's not a user pay experience? It goes to a destination site that they control, that large endemic advertisers like Intel, like Alienware, like Xbox will buy against, but then also non-endemics like Red Bull and Monster Energy Drink. And I think that's an example of really broadening the appeal of gaming content to advertisers that have large brand media budgets that are kind of elevating the conversation beyond just performance and direct response and into large sponsorship dollars in the hundreds of thousands. And I think that speaks to the shift, I think, to new advertising models that are going to be increasingly important and interesting for this audience.
So again, I go back to the content approach on some of this, and I'll defer to Greg Ballard, who's actually here from Warner Brothers, runs our gaming kind of studio there in terms of all the stuff that he does. So if you happen to go talk to Greg or go to some of his panels, you'll probably learn a lot more about what Warner Brothers is doing, where they see not only great licensing opportunity, but a lot of IAP done through some of the properties they've launched and kind of partnered with Kabam and other folks on. We typically, as Turner, even HBO, we've kind of stayed away from IAP because it's a more complex model of building some of these games that we haven't quite done very well with. But we understand the advertising space very well. And to Gavin's point, the appetite to be associated with some of the games that we put out is huge. And so to figure out what the right hooks are, what the right constructs are for advertising within the gaming world, I think is something we're very, very focused on in terms of not only a huge revenue driver, because it's an easier sell for ad sales guys, but it's something unique that a lot of the advertisers are looking for in terms of getting more pervasive, getting in front of a new demographic that they're not already in, and they're willing to pay higher CPMs to do some of that. Again, I go back to the point that when you have properties like Game of Thrones under the Time Warner umbrella, we're very light in terms of exploring what we could do there with gaming, in terms of the worlds and the franchises we can create around some of the shows and some of the content that we actually own. So again, I think IAP could still be very real for us and a lot of people that own really sticky content and huge fan bases in the traditional content world where we have not even explored IAP yet. But by and large, the advertising space is where we see a huge amount of appetite today.
You say today, and advertising in games sounds very attractive, but just gives away my age a little. I remember 10, 12 years ago, it was also kind of a hot topic at conferences. I'm not sure exactly when, but Microsoft bought Massive for several $100 million, and that turned into another MySpace or Playdom type acquisition. What's different now than then in terms of the appetite for advertisers or the opportunity now that wasn't around in the early 2000s?
I think there's a real recognition on the part of large brand advertisers that gaming is truly mainstream. I know that sounds, like a sort of a very sort of simplistic statement to this audience because we've known that to be the case for 10, 15, 20 years, right? And more. But I think that the appetite on the buy side is changing now from experimental budgets to mainstream budgets, and I think that's what's really fueling a lot of this interest.
Yeah, and I think if you go back to what we talked about, Lloyd, I mean, a lot of the companies you refer to, their advertising plays were also in the desktop space in terms of computer-based apps or computer-based games. I think the device proliferation and how you can take the games with you in a very interesting way, and people, we're captive consumers many places, airports, lines, queues, everywhere, and we tend to play these games more often than not these days because it's with us all the time. And so I think that creates huge opportunities for advertisers, whereas previously you had to go to your desk, you had to turn on your computer, and you're playing your game in that connected world.
And that actually reminds me of something that you said earlier that I also found very interesting, would love maybe to elaborate on for everybody, but how millennials consume content versus my generation or my mother's generation, and how that's affecting your investment decisions and also opportunities for the folks out here. How it, maybe the second screen now is television for millennials, whereas traditionally second screen has been the tablet. How do you see these trends developing? How's it investing your investment decisions, and what opportunities might be out there?
Yeah, for us, it's, I mean, again, it's a demographic that we have to reach, and we reach it pretty well with our Cartoon Network and Adult Swim group, as well as through a lot of the properties of Warner Brothers and HBO. Sports has always been a great place to reach these demographics, but by and large, because they inherently grow up with this technology, they expect a different level of interactivity. It's just the content is not static. It's not a broadcast-only mentality anymore, where we have to look at different ways to interact and truly look at native device capabilities in terms of what we can do and build around some of the stuff. And a lot of it's game mechanics oriented. A lot of it's interactive in general. And there are a lot of different things that we're trying to explore to figure out what's the optimal experience, either from a standalone perspective where we can truly monetize to the point of building real revenue streams around, or an integrated transmedia approach where there are hooks into the various aspects of what we do to make all these platforms really a revenue point.
Yeah, so I would say that, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I think the millennial content consumption trend is shorter form content, more fragmented content, and free, which is exactly what you don't want if you're building a great product, right? And I think that that trend is only going to accelerate whether you look at what is trending on YouTube or the speed at which great hits rise and then peter out on all the core chart rankings. So I would say that this is both an opportunity and a challenge, right? You're constantly fighting a lot of competition for eyeballs, for engagement, and for time, and I think that's why thinking about business models, thinking about partnerships, transmedia or otherwise, that can give you both distribution and then maybe ad-driven economics becomes more interesting. So I think companies that are in your space that are attuned to that, maybe that's not their primary focus from a business model standpoint, but attuned to it and can speak to it intelligently. I mean, that's definitely an area that becomes attractive to me.
And I'm going to open up for questions in a second. I just have one last question that I think is probably relevant for a lot of people who might be considering working with either of you or working with a similar strategic partner. But what would you say in the social casino space? one of the most promising, exciting companies got a strategic investment, and it's really inhibited their ability to sell to other partners because they don't want to deal with the strategic partner. So what would you say, to a company that's thinking of working with you? Would that be limiting their options in the future? Would you ever buy a company where Balaji is the largest investor, or vice versa? Kind of how does that dynamic work when you're, on the acquisition side, and how do you deal with it when you have a portfolio company who you might not want to take to the next level and has interesting opportunities out there?
I think it's a great question, and there isn't really a clear answer on this. I will say there's always perception, and then there's sort of the reality of taking cash from any source, right, of investment. I would say that in general, investors fit into kind of financial and strategic buckets. We're always attracted when you have great investors around the table that can help take a company to the next level, whether they are solely ROI driven or whether they have, kind of commercial interests as well. So, we fit into both categories. We're a carried interest fund, meaning we're looking for great exits, but we do so in a way where we bring value add to the table from the connections we have on the media and cable side of the house. So, I think we're particularly attuned to that, and it's about kind of educating the ecosystem, and then also understanding what is it that the entrepreneur most wants out of the capital we can bring. And I think where that alignment works out, it's not exclusive, it's not prohibitive. In fact, we don't have any expectations to have a ROFR on a future financing round or an exit, and Comcast has only acquired 2 of the 150 companies who have invested in both in the core video distribution space and not really in kind of content application. So I would say that our track record sort of speaks to being very willing and open to different exit paths, and we very much encourage that. And in the same vein, I think if we saw a company that was backed and endorsed by Turner, by MediaCamp, or other peers in the media space, I think that also speaks to a real strong stamp of approval from someone who's educated in the space, and at the end of the day, that on the balance is always going to be positive for us.
So, Gavin has a shitload of money. So if you want a lot of money, go to Gavin.
Really, really cheap, by the way. Really, really price sensitive.
But to Gavin's point, so we were the one of the first investors in Freewheel, and Freewheel, if you look at it was earlier this year or late last year, they were acquired by Comcast. So in terms of the synergy of the industry, there's a lot of synergy in terms of where the industry kind of sits and who to go to, who not to go to. For good or bad, we tend to move as groups to do many things. And that's partly because we're regulated, partly because we're consortium driven. And so there's a lot of initiatives and directional aspects of things that we invest in collectively. And then everybody else takes advantage of it because we think it lifts the industry up as a whole. So that being said, we always do look for competitive advantage, and we try to find ways in which we can do that. Part of what we do with MediaCamp, and what we hope to do, is find these companies early, really get them to market earlier with the Turner brands and the Time Warner brands, so that we have at least a 6 to 8 month competitive advantage in terms of going to market with it, whether it's increasing our distribution reach, better analytics, a different advertising play, or something around that to make our company better, faster, and more aggressive in the marketplace. So, but I think as an industry perspective, we do tend to talk a lot. Gavin and I talk a lot about companies. We talk a lot about different things. We have peers in other companies, Disney. So we know the guys at Disney pretty well. We know the guys at DirecTV pretty well. We know all these guys. And so we do share a lot of great companies with each other because it's worth taking a look.
On the other hand, I think if you hear yourself say something too often, you end up starting to believe it, and that's something that we always try and need to check against as well, right? So I think these networks, as Balaji mentioned, are extremely important to how I do my job. But a lot of it is also direct conversations with audiences that are really at the front line of development and product, and that's why I'm really excited about being here and why we do this. So just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you, guys. Do we have any questions? So the question was, there's big brands out there looking for startups. There's startups looking for big brands. How do they find each other?
So from our perspective, we get a lot of emails, and it's hard to respond to all the emails that we get. And if anybody here sent me an email and I haven't gotten back to you, I apologize in advance. But the easier way for us to react is less broad kind of connections. Come check out our stuff. More specific is, hey, we notice you have this brand. Here's something we'd like to do with them, and here's how the value we could bring. The more specific the connection gets made, the easier it is for me to connect the right people on the back end into the conversation so that the conversation flows quicker, decisions get made quicker, and it's less of trying to figure out how it might work versus you tell me how it works because you know your company and what your capabilities are better than I would.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, I want to thank our speakers. I think gave everyone a really good insight into how the strategic investment environment really looks. And thank you all for being here. Thank you.